All right, welcome back. We are COMP229 in the summer 2022 semester at Centennial, and it's week 2 of our broadcast and recording together. And this morning, what we're doing is we're going to be talking about a couple of things, but but first let's get into what we did last week, which we actually covered a lot of stuff. So last week, what we did was we downloaded and installed a bunch of things, including Visual Studio. We also downloaded and installed several extensions for Visual Studio. We talked briefly about version control. We downloaded and installed it Git and Git for Windows specifically. I asked you guys to create a GitHub account last week if you hadn't had one already. Most of you indicated that you did have a GitHub account. That's good. I also had you download and installed Node.js via NVM. So all of you should have Node.js installed, as well as NPM and Yarn and Nodemon and Light Server and a bunch of other things that I've asked you guys to do last week. That's what happened last week, Monday. We also downloaded and installed those modules, those third-party modules like we mentioned. And I did review some JavaScript concepts. I talked about immediately invoked function expressions, what they are, functions in different ways, as well as the dreaded var. And I said that please, 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 whatever you do, do not use var in any of its forms, because var is bad. It's banned. I'm just going to put a little line through it so you can see it. It is banned in our, our course. We're not going to use var ever because var promotes something called hoisting, and that was very, very bad. I talked about that at length last week, and how bad it is. And I did give a little example about a for loop and how, it kind of escapes. It allows variables to escape the scope of the for loop, which is pretty bad. Okay, so that's what we talked about. I'm just going to move this off screen. Okay, so that was interesting. So we did that. And more or less, we set up the course. I talked about, the project last week. So for people, there's 2 halves of the course that we discussed. The first half, which happens, now until week 7, we talked about it's all about you. So right now, what I've released today, and you should have access to it, is assignment 1, the Express Portfolio site that has been released. And let's just make that a nicer color. Sure, I'll make it this red color, and we'll actually just do a shape where we can, our fill will have a transparency of, like, I don't know, 20%. No, let's do 80%. There we go. So we don't want a line on that one. We'll make it no line. There we go. Yeah, so I've released the Express Portfolio site, requirement for you. It's released today. It's due in 2 weeks, right? And it's what it allows you to do, or asks you to do, is create a small Express server, right? And a lot of the requirements here are all about you, right? So please, one thing to note when I release stuff for you guys is there is a course shell. So some of the stuff that I've put up on the course shell is, in my opinion, super important to go through. So it talks about a lot of things that I will not talk about today, because there's quite a few kind of topics and things that we don't have time to discuss live. So what I'm asking you to do is read about the mean stack, read about Node.js, what that is, event-driven programming. It talks about NPM a little bit, CommonJS and Node.js modules, and all of those things, developing Node.js web applications, all of those things are up on the course shell. My expectation is that you'll read that this week, right, as part of your 4 hours that we have together. So 2 hours we're spending live, 2 hours is your responsibility to go through the PowerPoints and go through it. There is also a video tutorial that I've put up, about 16 minutes, about how to set up Node.js with JavaScript. We're going to be doing it live today with TypeScript as we introduce TypeScript today. I'm also going to release the completed code for the JavaScript version at the end of the week, so you can have access to it. I also recorded a video about 9.5 minutes for assignment 1 details. So all of the stuff that I'm looking for your Express portfolio. Please make sure you watch the video. It's very short, 9.5 minutes. And it talks about all the details for your Express portfolio. There is the PDF. Again, the dates for that aren't, the actual dates for this isn't important. The real date is Sunday, June 5th. And if you look at the requirements in your assignments, it tells you that exact date. So if you go to the assignments, and if you look at the dates, it's June 5th, 2022. So that is, if you look down in the calendar, we're sitting at week 2, so that's week 3, week 4, and then at the end. So June 5th, the Sunday, June 5th is when your Express portfolio is due. Guys, get started on it as soon as possible. You don't need to know Express to gather the content for yourself that you require for your portfolio. So that is assignment 1, Express portfolio. It's released today. It's due week 4. Please watch the video. It gives you all the details that you need about what is required, and so on. Okay, so that's what we talked about last week as well, the structure of the course. So again, the first half is all about you. Second half is a team project that you're going to be making. I'm going to give you a few options of which project you can create. And last week we talked about different installations. And this week is all around getting started with Node.js and all that kind of stuff. Just as a review, again, please remember that next week there is no class on the Monday because of Victoria Day. Victoria Day hits us on Monday, May 23rd, which means that we won't have class, but I will record everything and I will release all the details for that week's module, week 3. And it's super critical for you guys to do because that is an intro to Express, and you'll have everything that you need with that. Most likely what I'm going to do is release this module early, so you'll have it before next week, so you can start reviewing things ahead of time, because you're going to need all the details for this before you submit your assignment. Okay, so that's what's happening. So next week, week 3, and then Wednesday I'll record the video live with that group. Again, remember that because this is a combined section, guys, you can attend either Monday session, which is happening now from 8:30 to 10:30, or on Wednesday from if I'm not wrong, it's a lot later. It's 12:30 to 2:30. And the great thing about doing it on either day, you can come either day or both days if you really have questions. It's up to you if it suits your schedule. Okay, so that's totally up to you when you attend. As long as you attend one of those days, I recommend it. This way you can ask your questions and get real-time help for any of your problems. Typically what I do is I might go a little bit overtime, and I will stick around for any kind of questions and technical issues that you might have in terms of the way things are going. So things that I won't cover this week with you is any other installation issues. So I'm not going to go and do more installations this week. If you have problems with your code, GitHub, all those things, the stuff that I'll be covering, those things I'll help you with as much as possible. Otherwise, unless it's something that if your installations that we did last week completely don't work, then you need to take care of some of that on your own. Okay. Hopefully it all works by now. All right. So that is where we are. We're sitting at week 2. Remember also, I've also put on just this week as well, just a review. Again, the second half is all around your group work that we're going to be kind of going into. But for now, all we care about is, hey, what is the mean stack? That's going to be covered in your course shell. And we kind of talked about that really briefly last week. We said the mean stack stands for Mongo, Express, Angular, and Node. And I said there's also another stack called the MERN stack, Mongo, Express, React, and Node. And I'll try and cover React with you guys in the second half, which is not covered in the course shell. Okay, so that's something that we're going to be doing that's new. One other thing I said was, please, if you haven't had a chance to do that, in terms of response time and communication, remember that if you're communicating with me with email, it's 1 to 2 business days for me to respond to you. However, I will support Discord this semester, right? And I gave you guys a Discord link. I'm just looking over here at the Discord link right now. And there is a course Discord that I'm going to be using, and I gave you guys an invite link. I'm just going to go and I'm going to give you another invite link today, right? So for those people who didn't have a chance to join last week, if you haven't joined before, please make sure you you use this link. Just gonna put it up on the chat. So this is the Discord link. So if you haven't had a chance to join Discord, I think it's a great place to at least meet with other people, your other people that are in this course as well. If there's any kind of videos and so on, what I normally do is every week when there are some recordings, I kind of put the recording up on Discord. So here's an example of what it looks like. I'm just going to show you this. So that's last week's recording. And we did, we have a couple of things here. When you start off as a generalist programmer when you come into the Discord server. And there are definitely some discussions that we might know. Some people, we might have some things that I put up here. I also use Discord as a backup, just in case eCentennial is missing something, and I try and if I'm going to announce anything, I have things both here as well as in other places. Okay, so that is, the Discord server. If you haven't had a chance to join, as an example, I recommend that you do so today because it's a good little community server that we can use. All right. Any questions around the stuff that we covered last week? Any problems that you guys had from last week or anything else? So we have to move on to stuff that we're going to do this week. So last week also, just to recall, up online and M2022, I made a couple of folders. One of them was for you, week 1. And the other one was for the other group, which was lesson 1. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make another one, right? So last week we had a week 1 folder. And remember in that week 1 folder, we talked about Visual Studio Code and how it's used. We had a index.html file. We talked about Emmet and how we can quickly make HTML from Emmet. We had our scripts folder, our content folder, and our assets folder, and that's kind of a little client-side little example. I wanted to warm you up on how Visual Studio Code works and all that kind of stuff. So what I want to do is I want to base this week's work, right, on a brand new folder structure because we're going to be working with Node.js. So let's do that. So I'm going to make a brand new folder first of all. So we're going to call it for you guys week 2. So let's do that, week 2. And I'm doing it in the operating system, so File Explorer. If you're someone who is using a Mac, you would do it in your Finder, wherever you put your folders for this course. Make another one called week 2. It should be empty, right? And what I want to do is do some review of some same things that I did last week, but with additional things that we're going to cover this week. So I'm going to pull up Visual Studio Code. This is from last week. So I'm going to get right into the coding stuff as much as possible. And you can see we have a little bit of an iffy here that we talked about. I'm going to grab week 2 and drag and drop it in here. Okay. This week, what I've also done is I've released a bonus lab for you guys to put up your stuff up on GitHub. So we need to talk about this a little bit. So in week 2, now you should have everything that's empty here, just like I do. There's nothing in there. And for week 2, the reason why I'm starting from scratch is because the stuff we did last time was for client-side JavaScript. And now we're going to be moving into server-side JavaScript. And server-side JavaScript, it's very different than what we have on the client side. So I'm not going to include the same stuff that we did last day. but we do need an entry point. And I'm going to explain how this works. I'm just going to bring up our stuff for today. I want to talk about how we're going to set things up. Okay. So first of all, what we need is some kind of server.js file. So if we go back to our folder, I'm just going to make a new file, and we're going to call it server.js. So JavaScript, for the most part, was used, for front-end operations, front-end, scripting and so on. That was JavaScript for a long time. And the stuff that you learned in COMP229 was all about front end. Okay, so how to use document.getElementById, how to use document.getElements by class name, how to do a button, add event listener on a button. Hopefully you know how to do all those kinds of basic things on JavaScript and so on. But for me, whenever I look at JavaScript, I always think about progressive enhancement. I always think about the basic things that we need, which is we need some kind of content, we need some kind of CSS, we need a bunch of stuff. Okay, so around 2008, just a very brief history of Node.js. The Google V8 engine came out for Chrome, and it made JavaScript very, very fast. So it works on the back end as well as the front end. And one of the things that we learned about JavaScript that it is non-blocking. Okay, so and it's a single-threaded event-driven back end. Okay, single-threaded event-driven, not like PHP. PHP uses multiple threads, and the problem with that is it actually has a high memory uptake when it comes to how PHP and the whole AMP stack would work, Apache, MySQL, and PHP, right? So here, this is a lot different. And typically what we have is like a very simple file like server.js. And when we look at Node.js, the documentation, the best documentation for Node.js is really up online. So if you look at nodejs.org, this is start there. And I'll put that link inside of the chat. So here's nodejs.org. And there's always documentation under docs. If you click under docs, there is a pile of documentation here. We're using the 18.1.0 API because that's the one we're using. And one thing that it has, it talks a whole bunch of detail about all of the built-in functions. So one thing is that Node.js, the server itself, has a bunch of bundled modules. That's what they have, and these are all the modules that they have. They have the file system module, which is one we're going to use today. They also have the path module, which is also something that's pre-bundled. So there's nothing that you need to download for this one. And there's a bunch of other modules. So that's one thing that Node.js has. So this is not a bad piece of documentation at all. W3 schools, if I go W3 schools, and if I type in Node.js and W3 schools, actually, they have a pretty cool tutorial on how to use Node.js as well. So there's a bunch of Node tutorials here in Node.js, which is pretty cool. MySQL and Node.js MySQL and Node.js tutorial by default. Also Node.js and how to connect to MongoDB. So there's tons and tons of tutorials online about Node.js. It's not kind of a strange thing to do anymore. It's pretty much mainstream these days, which is a good thing. And so there's always ways to to get the latest details online about how to use it. But for us, what we need to think about is how Node.js works, because I need you to kind of do a little crash course today on how this works. I'm just going to bring up Sketchbook Pro here to help us out. So the way Node.js works is I have my basic, when I start using Node.js, I have a basic package, and Node.js comes with, it's very, very bare bones. Okay, it allows us to do certain things. But whenever I want to add in functionality, I plug it in. I add another module. And this module, for example, whether it's something that's local to Node.js, like for example, I want to access the file system. So this is the file system module, right? if I want to access the file system, I plug in or include or import file system, the FS, the file system module, into my server. That's what I do. If I need it, I plug it in, right? And let's suppose I also need to combine the path locally. I want more functionality on input and output, and I want to include the path module. So that's another module that I can plug in. That's how it works. So Node.js is modular. This is the way Node.js works, right? It's very much bare bones, right? So there's nothing to it in terms of when you start off, and you need to plug in functionality as you go. How do I plug in this functionality? I need to include it, right? Or import it, and there's a bunch of ways to doing it. One of the ways we used before when it comes to modules in JavaScript front end. How do we do modules in JavaScript front end, guys? How do I add multiple files? How do I split files across, or multiple files in JavaScript? Did you guys learn how to do that in your other JavaScript course? So let's say, for example, I have one JavaScript file, app.js, and maybe I have other ones. How do I use multiple JavaScript files in your project? How do I do that? Does anyone remember? If you don't remember, it's okay. Yeah, Elias says adding a script source. Yeah, we can. But the problem with adding script source is, let's suppose I have, typically what we do, this is on the server side, okay? So server side. Server side, we plug in some, some modules, and these modules, they literally just plug in here, like we import these modules, right? But on the client side, let's start with client side. So client side, if I didn't know about Node.js, what I would need is some kind of entry point to my, to my application. My entry point typically is my index.html file. So that is my entry point, okay? And my index.html file might have, kind of references to, like we did last week, to CSS and to a bunch of stuff. Import, Savannah, you could probably use your import statements, but you'd have to make it a module pattern for your index.html. So it's not as easy as doing an import typically. And let's suppose I have a bunch of other files. I have an app.js here, okay? I'm just drawing it out here so that you guys can get it. So here's my app.js. And what I want to do is inside of my index.html, I want to make a reference to my app.js here, let's say, somewhere in my index.html. What about if I had another one, like suppose I made a person class. I made a person class. How does that look? So here's my person class. And my person class, I want to make a list of people, right? As an example, this is also most likely going to be another file, a separate file. How do I do that? Well, I need to include it here as well, right? And it really, the trick is where to include it. Should I include my person class after my app.js? Well, it really depends when I'm going to use it. If I'm going to use my person class before my app.js, like if app.js needs to know about my person class, typically we want to include it before. Okay, so we have to include a person class, and maybe there's another one, maybe some kind of another type of class that we might need. Right? For example, let's say I have a books class. I want to have a number of books that every person has. Books, here's my books class. Then again, I would have to kind of tie it together with some kind of script source, like you guys said, right? So I need a script source that kind of connects my my different classes together, and it's all based on my index.html, where I have some kind of, script, and then source, like you said, equals to blah blah blah, right? That's what we do for each of them, okay? Script source. The problem with this paradigm, this way of doing things on the server side, is there is no index.html, guys. Right? You don't have an index.html on the server side, right? The server doesn't have there is the HTML file is used to communicate with the server. And one thing that we're going to notice is that when I have the client side, which a lot of times we will call the view, here's the view, right? So here's the view, the client side view. What happens is if I want to get information like all these things from the server, we do something called a round trip. Okay, so typically what happens is the client will go to the server and make a request. Okay, so this is what typically happens, right? The client says, hey, I need some information, for this particular site. Let's say, for example, my main site. Here's my request. And then the server will process that request and send a response back. Okay, this request response idea, right, is what you should have learned with Ajax. If you guys did a little bit of Ajax, hopefully in your JavaScript course. So here's my response. Okay. And the response typically, when you make a request to the server, here's something that I want you to think about. Do you get the response back right away? Can you depend on getting the response back immediately after you send a request to the server? Is that something that normally happens, guys? What do you think? And again, I'm asking you guys because I want to understand. So Rajan says yes. I'm going to tell you that it's no, actually. The response that you get back from the server request is not immediate. It's one thing I want you to always think about is that Node.js is funny. And JavaScript is even funnier because it's really asynchronous. So that means that because JavaScript is asynchronous, okay, that was weird. JavaScript is asynchronous, okay, because the response is asynchronous. That means whenever the server feels like responding, right, and it could be right away, it could be in 200 milliseconds. You don't know how fast it's going to respond. You cannot depend on when the server is going to respond to your request. That's one thing that you need to know about JavaScript and the way it works. So JavaScript, I might have several files that I link to. These files probably live on the server. All right, so that's one thing to note, that these files are not local, right, to the client. These files live somewhere on the server. All this stuff. All these files live on the server. Okay, and the client uses the index.html file that it lands on, or whatever the HTML file is, to access files on the server, and it makes a request of the server. The server takes that request, processes that request, and responds when it feels like it. Okay, that's what happens. It responds when it feels like it, it means that we have to have some kind of event that detects when the response comes back. Okay, that's how we work with the client. So client side, we have a bunch of files we link to. Server side, there is no index.html file at all. We have to kind of make another entry point, and that's why we use this, we require different modules for the server, and that's how we use the old way of doing it is called the CommonJS module pattern, which I will show you right now. And then we'll get into using something called the ECMAScript module pattern in a second. Okay. I'm talking about a bunch of stuff that sounds like magic right now. Let's start thinking about what the server will look like. So whenever we use Node.js, we can use something called a require. Okay, so require statement for Node.js, right, starts off like this. And typically what we want to do is we want to attach it to a variable. So for example, if I say something like, let's use a const. Okay, remember we said we're not going to use let or we're not going to use a var. So let or const is okay here. We're going to say const, and we're going to say I want to make my server on the server side. I want to plug in the HTTP module, right? Which is, when we go back to this little diagram I'm drawing here, I think that's pretty much a key module, no? If I want the server to be able to respond to HTTP requests, then one of the main modules I need to add is, the HTTP module, right? To allow you to respond to, to this protocol. So when a client makes an HTTP type request, then this module will respond to the request asynchronously, right? So I need to require. So I'm going to say, first thing, I make a variable. We'll call it HTTP. And we'll say HTTP, and I want to make it equal to and I want to require HTTP. Okay, that's typically what we would do. So HTTP, right, is if you notice if I hover over it, it says that to use the HTTP server and client, one must require HTTP. The HTTP interfaces in Node.js are designed to support many features, blah, 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 blah. But that is like kind of our first line whenever we make a Node.js server. Okay, const HTTP require. One thing to note is this format where I use a require statement, all right, by itself is called the CommonJS module pattern. CommonJS module pattern, okay? So, or CJS, okay? So CommonJS module pattern, guys, is a little older. This is what we used to do, more or less. And when I recorded this class a couple of years ago, this was the main kind of mostly what we did in the mainstream. All right, and I'm just going to give you some examples of what that looks like here. I'm just going to go back down to our Node.js. So whenever we develop Node.js applications, we have something that looks like this. This is our little server. Okay. So again, if you're this documentation here is up on your course shell, so you can always get to it. But I want to talk about what this thing looks like. So file system is another module that's built into Node.js, and HTTP is a module that's built into Node.js. You don't have to download anything else. Now that you've got Node.js installed, you and I did that last week, there's nothing more to download right now for this stuff, okay, at least. So first thing we did was this one, okay? We can also include the file system module, so let's do that too. So we'll say that, we'll still use CommonJS for now. We'll say const file system is equal to require and then file system, okay? So again, this is not so bad, right? And we have these two pieces. And now that we've attached these two pieces, and if I hover over, by the way, if you're using Visual Studio Code, the version that I'm using with you, you'll see that I'm getting some code hinting, all right? Some information about how all this works. You should have this information too. And the way I got that is by hovering over these things here. If my code coloring is different than yours, it's because I've chosen maybe a different theme than yours. But if you follow along last week, you should have everything that I have right now. Okay, so that's the two pieces that I have, HTTP and file system. By the way, the order that you attach these modules, just like it would look here, it doesn't really matter. As long as you attach these modules at the top of your file, you have access to all these things. Okay, so that's the first thing. The next part is I want to, again, I'm using this as a guide, right? So this is the thing. I'm going to access the HTTP object, and I want to create a little server at first. Let's see if I get some code hinting. So I'm going to say something like, hey, HTTP, let's create server. And then if I open up a bracket, it says, okay, I've got potentially two different overloads for this thing. Okay, two different overloads. One overload basically is this. I need some kind of request listener. So HTTP request listener, and it returns this thing, this create server, is a factory method that returns a server object. That's what it does, okay? And it tells you that. It says it returns a new instance of server. Okay, so it creates the server for you and returns an object called server. And we can store this HTTP server if we want to somewhere. We don't have to do it just like this. We can say that const server is equal to HTTP create server, right? And we need to feed it some information. Notice that it has a callback function right here. This callback function is where we're going to do anything that has to happen with the server itself. Okay, so this is what's going to happen here. So let's do that. So we're going to say something like, I want to make a callback function. Now this is an anonymous callback function that I'm going to use. And I'm going to pass in both the request object as well as the response object and some kind of curly braces. So this is how we start off. Okay, so again, I made a server. The server, notice it says it is of type. Whenever we read JavaScript from now on, I want you to hover over your mouse and notice here on after the server itself where it says colon, there is http.server. Anything after the colon means that this is the type. This is the type of object that I am looking at. Okay, when I'm inspecting with my mouse like this, okay, this is the type. So if I hover over HTTP, this is the type. It tells me it's a module, right? If I hover over a file system, it's a module. If I hover over a server, it's an HTTP server, okay? I can also do the same thing here. So I can say this is a request, and it says the request is a incoming message. This incoming message is coming from us, from the client, right? And I can do something with that request. There's also a response, which is the server response or the outgoing message. So we're kind of sending messages to and from the server. That's how it kind of works. And this is our first piece that we're doing. All right, so back to this. So that's the first thing. And now we can use our file system read file. That's what it says to do. File system read file in order for me to read, kind of something, from my my folder. Okay, that's what it says for me to do. So let's do this part. So I'm going to say inside of my server, I'm going to say, hey, file system, I want you to read file. Here's my read file, right? You can see that it pulls down with the stuff that we've done. And read file, it says what the first part that it takes in read file itself is the path object. The path object is a file system path or file descriptor. And if you look at my PowerPoint here, it does exactly that. It says, I need some kind of directory, some kind of requested URL, and there's a function that I'm going to be using for a callback function in case there's an error or data. Let's try this out. So again, what I need is, I'm going to use a global, which is dir name. Notice that if I type in underscore underscore, I get two globals that come up, okay, that you're going to learn about. Dir name means directory name. File name is the file name. So I want to know the directory name that we're looking at. So here's my directory name. And directory name plus my requested URL. That's what it means. So let's type that in. So plus my request dot URL. My request URL is the URL that I'm getting from whatever I type inside of the top of my browser, my URL itself, right? That's what I want to take. But I want to use my directory name and combine it with this. This is part of my path. Okay, let's take a pause here for a second and understand what this is doing. Okay, so first of all, let's just comment this out for a second. And let's do a console log. So we'll do a console log. And let's take a look at what is this underscore underscore dir name. What is this dir name that we're talking about? What the heck is this thing? Okay, let's take a pause and take a look at this thing. Good. So let's do this thing. This is our server, and all we care about is outputting my directory name. Okay, cool. Well, now that I've made my server, and let's suppose I'm not going to go further yet and read anything, right, from my file system. I just have my server itself that I just made. How do I activate my server? Well, there is a listen that I could do at the bottom of my server itself. And when I listen, I can listen on a specific port. So I can say something like, and I can do it in a couple ways. I can do it immediately after, or I can do it separately. Like this, I could say server.listen, okay? And I can listen on a specific port. And for now, let's make that port so it's not just any port, but I can specify a port number. Let's say that there's going to be a port that we're going to use. And then I'm going to have a callback function again that I'm going to use to kind of respond or to report about what that port is going to be. We don't have a port right now that we've created, so let's make one. Let's make a port that's up here. So up here, before everything else, we'll make a new port. Think about the port as a number, all right, that we're going to use to connect to. So we're going to say, we're just going to call this port 3000 for now, okay? So we've made a little server, right? It's listening on port 3000. And when I make a request, and if anyone makes a request to the server, it's going to respond with something like that is in here, okay? But I also want to pump out a little bit of information where I do a console log. And it's going to say something like, And by the way, we're going to use a template string here. Here's my template string, where I'm going to say server running at port, and then we're going to use $ curly brace, right, port. And if this seems unfamiliar to you, this is not an apostrophe, okay? This is a backtick character, which is underneath your escape key. So it's the backtick character. It's this. I'm going to put it inside of your chat. It's this. It's not this. This is very different than that. That's an apostrophe. The first one is a backtick. The backtick goes from the top left to the bottom right. Right? That's the direction of it. And when you use backticks instead of apostrophes or quotation marks, right? What it does is it creates something called a template string, okay? And the template string allows us to inject or interpolate anything we want to do with a $ curly brace, okay? So if I want to inject the port number inside of my string, then I use $ curly brace port, which we defined up here, and it injects it down in here. So when we do a console log, this is where it happens. Nice and easy. So again, let's review before we move on, because I know some of you are like, freaking out and you're going, oh my God, what the heck are we doing? What is this stuff that Tom is showing us? I'm lost. Don't be lost. This is new. It's all net new stuff, guys. Okay, it's nothing that you should have learned last time. Okay, however, you should recognize a couple of things. You should recognize a declaration, a const, right? You should recognize, some kind of assignment. We're assigning a reference to server. Server is actually holding a reference to the new HTTP server that I'm creating. I'm making an HTTP server and I'm holding a reference to it right here. So server represents the server that I'm creating here in a few lines. Okay, that's what it's doing. And then once I've created the server, right, I want you to think about this part right here as server is equal to a new server, like we do it in C# or something. So this would be something like, the equivalent to this might be something like, if we were in C#, it might be something like, server is equal to a new server, right? Where we have a constructor, right? This would be the constructor of the server. And then we store the server, a reference to the server instance here inside of our server object, okay? But this is not exactly correct. But more or less, this is what we're doing, okay? So server is what's being stored here, okay? And then what we're saying is listening. So listen is like an event listener. This is like saying something like server.add event listener, right? And we're listening for any kind of request. Let's suppose there was a request. We're listening for the request. And then we have a callback function, as an example, typically, to respond to the request. Okay, that's typically what we want to do. However, this isn't exactly true. We're listening for any kind of response. This is kind of initializing the server to listen on a particular port, right? So it's listening on port 3000. Okay, but again, I'm trying to relate to things that you would have already learned. Okay, so that's what these two pieces are. Actually, like we saw in the PowerPoint, you can do it in one, like this. You could do it like this as well. All right, cool. So how do I kick this server off? Well, I've given you a tool to do this for us. And but first, let's take a look at it by hand. Okay. So if I press Control backtick, you can see I'm pulling up my terminal. And you can also get to the terminal by going to View Terminal. Okay, that toggles the terminal off and on. That's what it does. View Terminal. Okay. You can also go Terminal, New Terminal, which makes a brand new terminal. You can have as many terminals here as you like within reason. Okay. You can also delete them. So this is a terminal. And what I can do to kick this server off is I can just type in node and then the name of the file, which is server.js. If I was to do that, it's going to say server running at port 3000. Okay, now let's take a brief pause and I'm going to go back to you. Are you with me? Check mark if you've done what I've done. And also, I want to know if you understand. Does everyone understand? If you don't understand, guys, now's the time to talk about this, because this is the lowest level when it comes to putting together your little server. All right, so I got 13, I got 14 out of 28 here. I'm hoping I can get more than half of you. All right, cool. Now that I have my server.js, I want to be able to access it. How do I access my server, right? Thank you for that feedback, guys. Thank you. I want to access my server. So I'm going to pull up my browser. And in the browser window, I'm going to type in my, can a port collide with another app port? Yes, it can. Absolutely. I want to type in the following. I want to type in localhost, and then :3000, and then type enter. Okay. And when I do so, it's not going to do anything because right now my server doesn't do anything. Okay. So if I go back though, look what it did. Here's my server, right? And in my server, right, it says server running at port 3000. That's what it does. And then it responded with this. Look, it actually printed this out. Let me show you that again. If I stop and if I refresh, right? So if I go to localhost 3000, right? It did it again. Here's my localhost 3000 again. And remember, I asked it to console log. So the console, whenever I do whenever I'm using Node.js, it doesn't go here in the browser. It goes here inside of my development environment, right? This is where the console is being seen, here. When I do a console log in my server side, it works here, okay? And this is the dir name. The directory name is my local path for my project. That's what the directory name is. Okay, let's stop the server. So the way to stop the server is press Control-C, which stops the server. Okay? Cannot find module. Well, the only way you can't find module is if you've either typed it wrong up here, right? If you've typed it wrong, or if you have not installed Node.js properly. That's where you should have if you're going to get a Node thing.
Professor, where to put the Control-C again?
Sorry?
The Control-C, where to?
You put it down here in the terminal. Okay, so when I start the server, I start it with node server.js. And when I stop the server, I press Control-C. And that's how I stop the server again. Okay, so that's start and stop. And Johan got an error, cannot find module as well. Okay, so cannot find module. So how is it that you can't find a module? Well, the only way you can't find this module is if Node.js is not installed. If you can't do node ---- version in here, right, and you don't have this, then you're not going to be able to do anything. You have to go back to last week and install your stuff because it should work, right? I literally didn't do anything here. I didn't add any modules or anything else like here. I'm requiring 2 modules, HTTP and file system, but I'm not really using the file system module right now. So I'm going to take this little code and I'm going to put it inside of your I'm putting it inside of your chat here for you. Yours is not showing the dir name. Are you sure? Because the dir name is just the name of your path, the name of your path to where you are. That's what the dir name is. The dir name is the directory name of where your project is. That's what it is, and that's what it's been printing out. Look, this is what it is. PS, right? That's me. That's my terminal, right? But this part is not my terminal. This is me printing stuff out. Let me show you this one more time. Let's add a path. Okay, let's put in a thing like this. So we'll make a backtick character, and we'll say that dir name. So we'll say, actually, we'll put out dir name like this, and we'll actually inject dir name in there. Okay, so we'll say underscore dir name is what we're going to put out here, and this is the end of the backtick character. So again, we're using we are using a template string here for this. Okay, so again, I'm going to save this server, and then I'm going to relaunch. So I'm going to say node server.js. And when I go back to here, and if I go localhost 3000 and press enter, right? Then if I go back here, it's going to say dir name. Look at dir name is equal to this. Okay, that's what it should do. Very, very simple. No problem. So, so if you see this, what's happening? It looks like nothing was happening before, but actually something was happening. Okay, and the thing that was happening is the directory name is being pumped out. Okay, cool. So that's what dir name is. Dir name is a global variable that is included in Node, and so is these. These are global or built-in modules. That's what these are. These are built-in modules. Let's go and put those in there. So we want to require built-in modules. Okay, that's what we want to do. Require built-in modules. And whenever we require any built-in modules, then this is part of the CommonJS module pattern that we're talking about. It plugs in modules for us. Okay, that's what it works like. Okay, that's what it does. So we want to do something more interesting than this, right? Nope, please do not install all your stuff again. If you've installed Node.js version 18, right, then either you're doing something wrong or you haven't typed things correctly. You should not get that error because Node.js, if Node.js is working down here, then there shouldn't be an error here at all. And it depends on where you're getting the error. If you're getting it down here or if you're getting it up here, okay? Because for me, there's nothing going on. Right? I haven't plugged anything in. My code should work like your code at this point. All right, and this is great. You know, this is kind of a first beginning, if you will. Let's go back to that little PowerPoint. Now, I want to use the file system module to read a file, right? And remember last week what we did? We had a little index.html file. So let's kind of Control-C out of here. And let's get rid of this. This is just for me to play so you can see what this looks like, right? I want to read my index.html file. Okay, that's what I want to read. All right, so let's make an index.html file in here. So again, I'm going to add a new file, index.html. Okay, and in my index.html file, it's different than my server.js. Server.js and index.html, two different files. Index.html. Remember last week we used Emmet, and in Emmet we said something like HTML:5. Remember this? And when we did that, it gave us this, right? And then what I want to use in here is change the title to COMP229. And I also want to have some comments. This is the HTML comment style. This is where my CSS goes here, right? If I was going to put any CSS, and maybe somewhere at the bottom, we might have some kind of JavaScript, right? This is where my JavaScript goes. And I had an h1 tag where we had a hello world. Remember this? Okay, and we did that, and we used light server to access this thing, right? Well, we're not going to use light server anymore. We want to use Node to get to this, right? And by the way, I'm not including any JavaScript files or anything else right now, just this very simple page, okay? So how do I load this page, this index.html page, with my server? My server right now, it doesn't do anything. It just makes a server and responds. That's it. So we can use the file system module for this. So file system, here's my file system module. We can use the dir name plus my requested URL, right? That's what we're going to use. And then after that, like it says here, we're going to have a function to respond. So we're going to say, okay, cool. I want to have a function. And the function has two parts, right? Two parameters. The first part is a Node.js error number exception. And the second part is something called a data, which is of type buffer. Buffer means it's an array of some kind, right? So again, it's error and some kind of data. And this function, right, is going to read the requested URL. And if the requested URL computes, if this is good, this is the path, right? Then what I want it to do is I want to say, let's respond, with the data. Respond end with data, okay? Okay, so this is it. So if I get an error, let's go back to this. If I get an error, then what do I want to do? I want to respond. I want to write to my page a 404, which is, so respond, I want to use the response object, this one right here. And I want to respond by writing to my page with a code of 404. That's my status code, right? So status, which is file not found, right? That's what it means. And then I want to do a response.end, where I want to take the error message and I want to output this error message. So output the error message to the page. That's what this does. What about if I don't get an error? All right. What about if I don't get an error? Then what I want to do instead, if I don't get an error, is I want to respond. I want to do a response write head. I want to send a status code of 200, which is all okay. That's what the status code means. That's what the status is. You guys should have learned these status codes from JavaScript 101, okay? I will. Just give me 1 second. So response write head 200, right? That's status okay, right? And then what I want to do is I want to respond end, right? And I want to end with some data. So again, I want to do a response.end, and I'm going to output the data that I read. The data is the stuff that's coming from my dir name and requested URL. So for example, index.html. That's what this is. This is my little first server that we're writing together. I'm going to take this whole thing, copy it, and pump it into the chat box for you guys. Okay? Here it is. Let's try this out and see how it works. So save. In order for me to start this off, right, I need to type in node and then server.js. Please make sure that this is the correct sequence. And then press enter. So now it says, hey, I'm running. The reason why it shows server running at port 3000 is because it got to this point, guys. If your server port 3000 doesn't get to this point, then there's something you've done wrong here or up here. That's why I copied everything into the chat box. All right, good. So now if I go back up to my code and if I type in localhost 3000 and press enter, I get this. It says illegal operation on the directory, read. Okay. Well, why? Because there is nothing at port 3000 unless I type in /index.html. If I type in index.html like this, then I might get something different. Like this, hello world. Take a look. So this is what you should get now. You should get your hello world if I type in localhost 3000 index.html. So notice what happened is, well, I went to here to my, I created a server, right? And then, again, I wanted this thing to output the message. It created a message 404, right? That's the status. And then it outputted that message to the page, right? And what this does, this res end, if it gets here, so this is if an error occurred, right? Any kind of error. How about if there's no error? So no error is here. I get to this part here, there's no error, okay? If I get to this part, well then it stops right here. Res response end. It ends the response and it stops right here. It doesn't even go to this part. Okay, that's what this does. Okay. And this res end, this data object, this data is reading from my directory and my requested URL. If my requested URL computes, for example, if my requested URL is index.html, then it looks at the index.html file in the directory and takes that file, converts it to buffer, some data, and outputs it here. So this is output the file that was read, right, to the page. That's what it did. So very specific. Okay, I want to try something. While the server is running, listen to me, what I'm going to say here. While the server is running, and this is a test for you guys, okay? A little test. while the server is running, without me stopping and starting the server again, I want to output not just the message. I don't want to just output this message to the page here. So going back to the page, if I just typed in, remember the message we got, the error message we got was this, that error, illegal operation on a directory read. We can't read a directory that doesn't exist, or a file that doesn't exist. Okay. So that is the error we got. That is the error we got, right? So instead of typing it out there, I want to also see it here inside my console. So let's do that. So we'll say, let's do a first, before we do this, a console log of the error message as well. I want to do this too. So I want to output this to the console. Output to the console. And this is the dev console, guys, the dev console, which is this in my Visual Studio Code. Okay, I only see it here. I don't see it here on my page, just here in my console, right down here. And what about if I'm good? Well, then I want to also do the same thing on a console log here, right? My data to my console down here. Okay, if I'm good, I want to output it down here. All right. Okay, I've saved everything. What do you think is going to happen? This is your test. Don't try it. Tell me what's going to happen. Will it work? Will this work right now? If I just want to, if I don't, do anything right now, and I just save, will it actually output anything to my console right now? This is another learning, guys, that you need to know about Node.js. Jensen says no, and I agree with you. It's no. Why is it no? So let's try this out first of all. So here I go here and I refresh, and it doesn't show anything down here at all, right? And if I put in my index.html, and it doesn't show anything down here at all, even though I told it to. How come? Why didn't it do this? It doesn't do it. If you said no, you're correct. And the reason why you're correct is because, guys, I've created my server here, right? Once I create my server, it's created. It's an instance. It's an object. I can't modify the object when the server's been created. As soon as the server has been created, it's immutable. Okay? So when we create a server instance, right, it is, and I'm going to type this in caps, immutable, which means it cannot be changed. As soon as I make this object and I'm listening for this particular object, it doesn't matter what I do in here. If I don't, even if I save it, it doesn't matter until I restart my server, right? Until the server is restarted. Guys, this is a key learning when it comes to Node.js, because it doesn't matter what I do in here, right? My server won't respond the way I'm thinking it should until I respawn my server. When the server is running, I cannot change anything, right? However, if I start my server again, if I Control C and I do Node.js again, node server.js, right? And if I go back up to my, let's get that error again by going up here and press enter. Well, then I get that. Here's the error. Look, error, illegal operation on a directory read. Right down here, it says my response, I'm still doing this too. I'm coming to this point, right? So here is, let me just show you something else. Let me just Control C for a second. So Control C, okay. Let me make some other things. So we'll say, again, just like we've done before, backtick error, right? We'll do the template string in here as well. So error, and we'll kind of inject the error message. This is the template string, right? So we're injecting the error message, but we're going to use a prefix that tells us that this is an error. It's going to say error from now on. The server is stopped right now, so we can do this, right? And when there's no error, I want to put in a backtick that says data. Here's my data, right? And I want to inject my data in here too, so you can see what the data looks like. So there's my backtick for error here. If this triggers, then I'm going to have a console log in my development console down in here that's going to show the error, right? If it doesn't trigger, if there's no error, if I found my index.html as an example, then it's just going to show console log data down in here with the entire file, my entire index.html down here, I'm hoping, okay? So let's save this, save the server, and let's run it again. Node server.js. And if I go back up to here and press refresh, then down in here I get error, right? I get error. Take a look at these two messages. Error, EISDIR, right? So error in the directory, illegal operation on directory read. We get that down here. And we also get this. Data undefined. Wait, what? Tom, didn't you say that when I come down here, I don't do anything? Yep. Yeah. It's true. I don't do anything. But I want to point out that when I come down here, I'm getting both things happening right now because there's nothing to stop me from coming in here every single time, right? I'm always going to write this part. I could write this in an else. I could say, let's make an else, right? So it's either one or the other. Either I get an error or I do this. That's definitely a way of doing it, right? I could do this way. I could do this, right? Save. And let's just restart the server, right? Node server.js, okay? I'm restarting the server. And when I go back up and if I refresh the page again and I go back down, I only get the one error anymore. I don't get both errors. I don't get both things. There's another way to do this, right? Without writing the else statement. Else's are okay, but I could also write it like this. I want to return. I could use the return statement in here as well, right? And if I did this and I took away the else now, so no more else. I just took away the else. There's an if, but no more else's. Will it get to here? Will it get to here if I put a return statement in here? Okay, so save. And let's do a node server.js. Okay, and I refresh this page again. And I come down and yeah, it didn't get to there anymore because of this return statement. Wait a minute. But this file system read, right, it actually returns void. That's what it returns. Anything after the colon, remember, guys, it returns some kind of a variable, right? So, wait, so if I put a return statement, what, I don't understand. What does return do, right? What does return do, as an example, if I put the return statement in there, but there is nothing that this file system read file function, it doesn't return anything. How can I return if there's no return type? Or remember in JavaScript, what happens? I can put a return in any function, right? And when I return in any function in JavaScript, it's going to return its type, which is void. It doesn't care about this. It's going to do this first, this object, and it's going to go into, well, nowhere. It's not going to go anywhere at all, right? So return, you're going to see this pattern where we're going to have a return and some kind of statement. And that's okay, guys. Because what does res end return? Res end returns a HTTP server response, okay? Which means that res end is going to take that HTTP server response. I want to return it, but it's not going to do anything with it because our read file doesn't do anything with our data, and neither does this. The create server, right? It returns a server, but it doesn't do anything with my response. It just returns. It means it leaves this statement altogether. It stops operation of this statement and it skips out of this altogether. It's almost like a break. That's what it does. Okay. I can do the same thing here. I can say return res end. But if I did it here like this, that means my console would never fire. This would never trigger because I would never come down to line 21. It would hit line 20 and then, well, it would stop working, right? So if I wanted to output anything to the console, I have to put it before the return here, like how I've written it up here, okay? So why am I spending so much time talking about this? Because if you looked at this piece of code in the beginning, and we're looking at this piece of code over and over again, because I want you guys to get it. It takes time for you to get or understand how Express works, okay? And how Node.js works. Okay, let's Control C on the server here for a second. Let's save the server file and let's run it again. Node server.js. Okay, cool. And if I press refresh, it's going to give me that that response. But if I put in index.html and press enter, it's going to show me the entire HTML file, guys. Down here, look. The entire HTML file is the data that's being shown. That is the data. Okay? So the data, what the data part is, this part right here inside of my parameter, it reads everything from the file and outputs it to to your page. That's what it does. And that is a very simple example about how your Node server would work. Okay? And this is very simple. So simple that it won't work with everything. For example, it only works with HTML type data. You have to specify if it has some other kind of data that you want it to read. Okay? For example, a CSS file or a JavaScript file. And the way to read a CSS file or a JavaScript file or a JSON file is you have to specify its MIME type. Okay, let's go back to that. MIME type, right? So MIME types, which is interesting, if you look at the docs for HTML, okay, here's the docs from Mozilla HTML. So what is a MIME type? It is the type that we're trying to read, the type of file that I'm trying to read. And there are different types of files I want to read. For example, I want to read an application. I want to read a font. I want to read an image. I want to read some text, some video. Maybe I want to read, some CSS or, text CSS or text HTML or text JavaScript. These are different types of or different MIME types. And yes, I could go through and read every single MIME type, okay? But that is going to present a problem, okay? And we'll talk about this problem now in a second. Let's go back to our little server and go to it. Now, here's something I don't want. I don't want to keep on starting and stopping my server a million times. This is a real pain for me. And I'm sure it's a pain for you. I got to do Control-C, Control-C. That's why I got you guys to download and install Nodemon last week. If I type Nodemon, it's going to go, well, I don't know what to do. So you need to specify a Nodemon script. For example, if I type Nodemon server.js, it's going to run the server.js and give me some descriptive output. Here, let me show you what this does, which is kind of really neat. So instead of directly going node server.js here, I'm going to use Nodemon. Okay, so Nodemon. Remember last week we installed Nodemon? That's why we did it. We did it so that way we don't have to restart the server. If I make any changes to the server itself, Nodemon automatically restarts my server. That's what it does. Okay, so Nodemon automatically restarts my server. Awesome. Let's get back to this then and go back to my COMP229. If I press refresh, right, on my page with my localhost 3000 index.html in there, then you can see that Nodemon actually prints it out. Okay? And if I go back out to here and if I take this away, just for a second, and if I press enter, then Nodemon also does that too. Okay, Nodemon does the exact same thing that Node.js does. However, this is the really cool part about it. What if I make a change to some of these things, right? If I want to make a change to what it says in data, right? Instead of, I don't want to print out my data anymore, all right? So I don't want to print this out. If I press save, Nodemon will restart. Anytime I make a change and I save my server.js, it will restart automatically for me. So this is kind of a really cool tool to make it work. No Panth. No. You should have Nodemon because all the stuff we installed last week, you should have Nodemon. But if not, please stick around afterwards and then I'll try and help you fix your problem. Okay. All right, so that's Nodemon. Nodemon, I just took away something and then it restarted automatically, right? And same thing with this. If I don't want to see my error message, I can remove it. And if I save my file after making changes, like save, then automatically it restarts down here. You can see that Nodemon restarted twice. Okay. Make sense? All right. So again, very, very simple ways of doing things. In terms of stuff. MIME types, I want to read more than one type of file. How do I do that now if I want to read more than one type? Well, haha. I can use a third-party module for that. Okay, a third-party module. A third-party module is a module that I want to download and install. Let's stop Nodemon for a second. So Control-C to stop Nodemon. And I want to talk about this for a second. Whenever I download and install third-party modules, it's a good idea, a good practice to use something called a package.json file. Okay? So the way to initialize a package.json file, let's clear this up, is to, let's use Yarn for today. So Yarn is the new module. We downloaded it last week, and I'm using it this week. You issue a command like this, yarn init. Remember last week we installed Yarn? That was one of your requirements. Okay, remember guys, this is all being recorded for you. So worst case scenario, if you don't get any of this, you can try this out again later. If I do a yarn init, right, and if I press enter, then what it's going to do is it's going to give me a couple of things. It's going to say, warning, there's no package.json, no license field. Do you want to install a new package.json? And what this little yarn init does is it's going to make a new file called package.json by asking me a series of questions. So this question is, what is the name of my package, right? Or my project. My project is called week 2. Let's make it more descriptive. We'll say COMP229. You can change what it says here. Instead of week 2, you can change it for yourself. It has to be all lowercase, guys, everything you enter here. COMP229-summer 2022, and we'll call this week 2. Enter. Next, what's the version of your project? We'll make it 0.01. So it's 0.01. 0.0.1. Okay, enter. What's the description? This is a demo project for COMP229 in the summer 2022 semester. You can see I can be very descriptive here at Centennial. Okay, that's my description. Okay, and maybe I can also backspace here and change the D to a capital D and press enter. Cool. What is my entry point? We're going to make it our server.js. Enter. What is my repository URL? This is my Git URL. I don't have that right now, so I'm going to press enter. What is my author? That's me. Or you, in this case. Right? Okay, what about my license? Let's just press enter for an MIT license. Okay. Is it private? Let's press enter for that. No, it's not. And it saved a package.json. So this little yarn init, what it did was it was a little batch file that ran and created a package.json file. The package.json file looks like this. That's what it was created. And you can modify this as much as you want. Okay. And we're going to do that extensively this semester. We're going to modify this little package.json over and over again. Okay, no problem. So stick around after. All right, so there you go. So there's the stuff that we've got here. Okay, you've got your package.json. Package.json, I want you to think about your package.json as the manifest for your application, right? We're going to write an application. This is the manifest. The manifest is basically going to indicate all the packages, external modules and stuff we're going to add in. And we're going to add an external module for the first time today. Let's do that. I want to add in the MIME module, okay, or it's called MIME types. Here's how you add it in. I'm just going to clear the screen. Okay, you type in the following: yarn add, right? And you want to add in MIME -types. Okay, yarn add MIME types. Okay, and press enter. And what it's going to do is it's going to go up, right? Grab a MIME types from the npm registry. Okay, so if I go up to find what that is, if I look at the npm registry, right? npm registry is a registry of all different kinds of Node package modules. node modules. That's what they are, right? And if I look for MIME types here, so this is the npmjs.com is the node registry. Okay, this is the registry. This is where everything is registered. All of the node modules we're going to be downloading this semester, pretty much, right? And if I look for MIME types, if I look for that, it'll say, hey, there's one. It's MIME types. And MIME types, it tells you what this module does. It says the ultimate JavaScript content type utility, and it says how to install it. You can use npm. We used yarn add instead of npm install, right? And all MIME types are based on the MIME database. So open a PR, a pull request if you like to add more MIME types is what it's saying, right? This is how you add it. var MIME is equal to require MIME types. Notice they're using var. We don't use var. We never use var, but this is kind of the basic thing that they're showing us. And this is how you do it. MIME lookup JSON, MIME lookup markdown, MIME lookup an HTML file, and so on. Okay, so it looks up the type of thing that we're looking to try and find, and then it responds with the MIME type. So this is the way you would use the MIME types module. Okay, so I need to install it like this right after I use it. Okay, cool. So up at the top of my file, I've just installed MIME types. By the way, let's also see what it did in our package.json. Package.json, it listed MIME types as a dependency. So yeah, I'm gonna quiz you guys on this next week. Okay, let's see if, well, not next week because you guys aren't here, but I will quiz you guys on this. There are two types of dependencies. There is a project dependency, which is this type, and there is a dev dependency. A dev dependency is something that we need for us, for developers, but it's not going to break the project. However, a project dependency is something that if I don't have it, will break my project. Okay, will break my project. So this is my actual project dependency. Okay, and so package.json that we added in by using the yarn, we had a yarn init. Remember we did that yarn init? And what yarn init did was, as soon as we did a yarn init, it asked us a series of questions, and those series of questions created the package.json file, which I call my manifest. All right. When I did a yarn add, it went to the npm registry, fetched the MIME types module, and placed it inside of a new folder in your project called node modules. Right. Notice that their node modules has two subfolders: MIME database and MIME types. So it had those two modules that we downloaded. And it did it by using this command, yarn add MIME types. That's what it did. Okay. Now I want to use MIME types, and I'm going to go into my server.js, and I'm going to do that exact thing. I'm going to say that const MIME, or we'll call it MIME, is equal to require, and I'm going to type in MIME types. Right, so I'm going to require MIME types. Notice that came up. Let me try that again to show you. If I type this in, notice I get a bunch of things I can require, right? I get a bunch of code hinting here. This code hinting comes from Visual Studio Code. It has nothing to do with me, all right? And if I scroll down, I can find MIME types. It found the module, right? So what require does is it looks for a node modules folder. It looks for one of these folders in your file system. And if it finds it, it looks to see if there's any modules that it can recommend. MIME types is one of the modules. So I'm going to add this one in. Now, MIME represents, the module. But, however, notice I get no code hinting for this. No code hinting. I don't even know what MIME does. And if I was going to type in MIME dot something, right, to use it, I might not have a success. Let's try this. If I said something like my lookup, right? I want to make an alias, and I'm going to say is equal to MIME dot. Well, I want to do MIME dot lookup. This is what it should do for us, right? And when I do something like this, this is like a little alias for MIME dot lookup. So this way I can use the keyword lookup instead of MIME.lookup. It's a little alias, a shortcut, if you will, if I did this, okay? But this is also a great test to see if MIME, the code hinting, is working for you. And it should be. It should say that, well, my lookup, you need a file name or extension. That's what lookup will do for me. Okay. Excellent. Good. Let's change some of this stuff. Inside of the server, I want to use a let statement. So I'll say let path, and I'll show you the entire file in a second. Let path equals to, let's do this path like this. We'll say request.url. Okay, that's what we want to say. So the path will be the requested URL. This is again an alias for request.url because path makes more sense. This is almost like the file name, if you will, right? And what we want to say is if my path, right, is equal to slash, okay, or if my path is equal to something like slash home, all right, if one of those is true, then it doesn't matter. My path then is going to be equal to slash index.html. Okay, let's go through this, what I'm doing here. Okay, so I'm saying, hey, let's intercept my request URL, whatever that is, okay? And then check to see what it is. If my path is slash, well, when is my path slash? Like this is a forward slash, okay? Forward slash goes from the top right to the bottom left. Backslash goes from the top left to the bottom right. When my path is equal to forward slash, well, when that happens, typically it's when I have something like this, all right? So the forward slash path means that there's nothing that's put in here. Think about this as the root or default path. The default path looks like this all the time, okay? So if my path is equal to forward slash or the default path, or if my path is equal to, I made something up, slash home, if it's my home page or if it's my default path, then I want you to think about my path, I'm saying to the program, as path is equal to my index.html. Okay? If one of these two cases is true, my path is this. And instead of going directly into my read file, this is where I'm going to use my MIME. Okay, here's what I'm going to do with my MIME type. I'm going to say let MIME type, my MIME type equals to lookup. Lookup is this lookup up here, all right? Is equals to lookup. I'm going to take my path dot substring, and I'm going to look at my substring from the first thing, right? Now, remember what substring is? Substring, that's from JavaScript 101 from before. It says, where do I want to start? I want to create a substring, a second string, right, from the original string, right? I want to create a second string from the original string, starting at character 1. Remember that strings are 0 index based. So if I have this string right here, right, then the first character, the 0th character is the slash, right? And I'm saying let's sanitize that a little bit. So sanitize the path, right, by removing the first character. That's what this substring does. Substring says, start looking from character number 1, which is this one. Okay, don't look at character number 0. We don't care about character 0. We care about character 1 and on. So that is going to return index.html without the slash, okay? And what I'm saying is, hey, MIME type, look this one up, this object, this thing, and tell me what the MIME type is going to be. It's going to say either it's going to return string or it's going to return false. Okay, the string that it's going to return is going to be something that it looks up from the database. The MIME type database is this thing that I'm entering in. Is it a text HTML? What is it? Let's print that out. Let's do a console log. And we'll use a backtick character. And we'll say this is the MIME type, right? And we'll inject the MIME type by using a $ curly brace, right? We'll say MIME type, this one. We'll print it out. Let's print out what that MIME type is. when I look at a file, what is that MIME type? We'll print it out, okay, every single time. Okay, now, when we get to the file system read, because we've done all this pre-work, let's do this. We'll say file system read file from the directory name. Instead of requested URL, which we are sanitizing, we'll put in the path, right? And we'll say that that's what we want to look at, the path that we've cleaned up, okay? Again, if error, we're going to get an error here. We can change the error so it's not error message. We can have another error message of our own. Or we say something like error, right? 404, file not found. We can put that in there. This is the output to the page, to the page itself. That's a return, right? Or when we do a write head, before we do a write head, let's do another kind of thing. We can res.set header, and this is a little bit of code I'm going to give you, which is x content type options. And I'm going to say that I want to use something called NoSniff. And what NoSniff does is, because MIME types present a security issue. So this is a security guard. So if I'm going to use MIME types, which is what I'm doing up here, I need to, and without going into too much detail because we're going to run out of time, MIME types can be sniffed by a bad actor or someone who is looking to break you or to get more information about your system. They can sniff the type of MIME type that I'm looking at. And if I sniff enough of your directory, I can get a sense of what you have on your system. Okay, so I want to set a header to prevent that, prevent someone from trying to figure out the MIME type on their own. Okay, so that's what this is. And then the next one is my write head. I'm going to modify my write head to say something that looks like this. Write 200, but I also want to configure the MIME type, content type. And I want to specify that the content type is the MIME type. So for example, if I'm reading a index.html page, then the content type is going to be HTML. If I'm reading a piece of CSS, then the content type is going to be CSS. If I'm reading JavaScript, the content type is going to be JavaScript. Okay? And that's it. That is my new and improved little function. Okay? Let's put this up, this whole thing. I'll put this whole thing up on your chat if I can. Let's see. Hopefully it'll take it. It will not. Let me just put this. I have limitations on how to do this. Let me put the server.js file. Let's do that. So server.js. I'll take that whole server.js file and I'll populate that on your chat. That will work. There we go. Okay, that's my server.js the way it is right now. Okay, let's run this thing. Let's see what happens when I run this thing now. So again, I want to do a Nodemon, right? Server.js and press enter. And you can see that I'm listening on port 3000, right? And now if I go to my page and I press refresh, it's going to say, hello world. Wait a minute. I didn't even put anything in there and it's working. How is this working now? Well, remember that this is like me saying this. If I do this or just this, it's the default root. And we said, going back to our code, that if we have the default root, or if I put a /home, right? If I put a /home in here, like so, then it's going to go to my index.html and read that. That's what we said. If it's one of these two things, then read index.html. But what if I put something else that it doesn't recognize? Like, let's say I put something like /tom, right? It's going to say error 404, file not found, right? Because that's what we told it to do, right? We told it to do that exact thing. We said, if you don't find the file that I'm looking for, you know it's a 404 type error, print out 404 file not found. By the way, take a look at what it did down here for us. Remember MIME type? The MIME type that I read up here, it says, okay, cool. So let's go through line by line. So line 2, I required or installed the built-in HTTP module. Okay, and I stored a reference to it inside of HTTP. I required the built-in file system module and stored a reference to it in this FS constant, right? I required the MIME types module. That's a third-party module that we downloaded through the npm registry in Yarn, and we store the reference to it inside the MIME constant, right? We made a little alias. We're going to do a lot of aliases this semester to make it simpler to look at, and we've made it so that the variable lookup means mime.lookup. These two are equivalent. I'm getting the lookup is the lookup function, and lookup itself, this lookup variable, is a reference to the lookup function. That means I can use lookup as a function, okay? I've configured our port. Our default port is 3000, right? And then I made a new server object, right? We made our server object while the server is running, right? We have a little function that takes in or a callback function that takes in the request and response object every single time. We've cleaned up our path. This is our cleaning up of our path, where path is actually equal to request URL, the default URL that I type in, and we check to see if the path is either the default path, which is / or if it's /home, okay? And if that's true, let's change the path. So now, instead of one of these two, it's going to equate to this, so that our file system understands it. Because our file system doesn't understand this, and our file system doesn't understand this, but it does understand this, okay? Good. Then, let's check to see what my index.html, what type my index.html is, and let's output that type. That's what we said. So on line 21, it starts outputting that type, and it says MIME type is equal to text HTML. But then when we went to a file we didn't recognize, for example, a file that doesn't exist here, we tried to look up Tom. Tom doesn't exist. Tom doesn't compute. Heck, I could have put on anything I wanted up here. I could have put down, I don't know, about.html, and it will still get the same response, right? There, we don't know what about.html is. It's false. It doesn't do anything for us, okay? So that is the type, MIME type. We output that, and then we do a file system read file of, if it computes, dir name plus my path. That's what we're doing. Dir name plus my path. Dir name is the directory name, which is C:users, Celiopolis, OneDrive, desktop, Centennial, this whole path, plus my index.html. It reads that whole thing, right? And if there's an error in reading that file, right, then output error file 404 is a file not found. Or if there's no error reading that file, then use a security guard so that some bad actor, right, some malicious user can't sniff the MIME type if they know I'm using the MIME's type module, and write a better head than just 200. Also indicate the type of file that I'm using to the browser. Tell the browser that I'm reading an HTML file, all right? And then finally return this data and output it to the browser. That's what this part is doing. I know I went into this again and I spent some time doing this, but I need you guys to understand the basics of how to make a server. Next week, when we come back, we'll make a much simpler server than this using Express, right? But for this week, I want you to understand the underlying technology that we're using here with Node. Node is the basic module. Remember, Node, if I go back to here, it's a very no-frills module, and we need to plug in stuff. We plugged in this new module, which is the MIME types module. MIME types is another module, but it's not built in, right? MIME types belongs to the npm registry. MIME types, right? The npm registry. And so what we can do is every time we want to extend the functionality of our server, we plug in more modules, my friends. We plug in more modules, if that makes any sense to you. Awesome. Okay, hopefully you guys got that. Questions before we move on? How about this? Are you with me? Check mark if you're with me, X if you don't understand. I got some check marks. Okay. Excellent. Good. Okay, Bhupinder, talk to me. What's the issue? Okay. No problem. No problem. I'll spend time with you guys after. No problem. All right. So that's awesome. So I've got this part ready to go, and we're outputting the MIME type. That's nice. How about if I wanted to make this a little bit more complex? Let's add a couple more folders over here. So one, let's make a new folder called scripts. And we did this last day. And let's add another folder called content. Right? And let's, inside of our scripts folder, let's make a new file, right? Like we did last time, called app.js. And in my app.js up here, let's put in a couple of additional things. Let's put in the iffy, right? I want to put an iffy in here like we did before, right? So here's our iffy. And inside my iffy, this is on my app.js here. I wanted to show you this. Let's plug this in. We'll have a function, called start. And the function will do a console log, like we did, app started. Okay. And we'll do a little window.add event listener on load. We'll call the start function. This is all we did last day too, right? So this is our little iffy. Right? And I want to include this function inside of my index.html. I'm going to do that by going down in here and typing in script source and then /scripts/app.js. There it is, right? And let's also add some CSS in here, right? So in content, we'll add a new piece of CSS, app.css. There we go. And in our CSS module, we'll just modify the h1 tag, right? So all h1 tags, we're saying, let's change the font size, font-size. Let's make, for all h1 tags, the font size is going to be 30 pixels. Okay, that's a little piece of CSS. Doesn't do much, but hey, this is our test. And I want to take this CSS code and include it in my index.html. So again, I'm going to go back over here and do a link, right? CSS, where I type in /content/app.css, save. And now this is my HTML file. Okay, so my HTML file is a little bit more complex. Here's my HTML file. I'm going to take these files for you and give them to you. So here's my index.html now, right? Here is my app.js, pretty straightforward. And I'm giving them to you on your chat there. And here's my app.css, pretty dumb and straightforward too. Yeah, you have all those too. You can always use those. Okay. What do I get now with my Nodemon? What do I get? Right? What do I get now with my Nodemon? So if I go back up to this, and if I type in just my default path, then I get hello world. Okay, cool. Excellent. And what about what I get down in here? Take a look what it did. I got 3 MIME types from that one page. I got a text.html, I got a text.css, and I got an application JavaScript. I got 3 things that it read. Wait, what? This doesn't make any sense. How did it read 3 things when I only went to my page once? How did that happen? How did it happen, guys? I want you to think about this for a second, right? So I went to my page. Here's my server, okay? Here's my server, and I only do this MIME type lookup and output. I should only do this once, no? Because I mean, I'm only doing one request for my page. Isn't that how this works? What are your thoughts? Talk to me about your thoughts, guys. Why am I getting 3 MIME types down here? I'm getting a text HTML, a CSS file, and an application JavaScript in this order. Because all 3 are running on the page. Okay? So here's my page, index.html. But how does a page work? I want you to think about how a page works. Okay? So the browser comes over and says, hey, let's take a look at the first line of my code. doc.html. Awesome. Second line. It's of the HTML type, HTML5 is what I'm saying here. Okay, cool. With a language of English. Okay, cool. Next, here's my head element. Okay, good. Let's read the meta. Character set is UTF-8. Cool. All right, next. Let's look at if I am an IE or Edge browser, then I'm going to make it compatible with my Chrome browser. Excellent. 6. We're going to say that the device width is equal to initial scale 1. So if I'm using a mobile browser, then it's going to look the exact same way. That's what the meta tag in line 6 is. Okay, line 7. Let's make a title for my page, COMP229. Line 9, because it skips comments. Line 9. Okay, let's link a style sheet. Ta-da! Link style sheet. Uh-oh, guess what this is? This makes another request. This makes another request, my friends. As soon as I link anything inside of my page, it goes back to the server and says, okay, how about this one? This is a new request. But I'm in the middle of my first request, right? Think about this as layered requests. I'm making multiple requests, right? As soon as I go into my index.html, I'm making multiple requests. Anytime I include something like this, I'm injecting the link, the style sheet inside of line 9. That's how it works. Okay, good. I go to my body style. I do my h1 tag. Cool. And I modify it with my app.css, whatever that is. Cool. And then I come down to script source and I do another request. This is another request. So I do a second request. So that's why it looks like this. I do the first request. I do the second request. I do a third request. And I do that all with one page. That's why I need different MIME types, right, to read different parts of the page. That's why I need that module. If I don't have that module, I don't understand what CSS is, and I don't understand what JavaScript is. Okay? Excellent. Okay, well, let's do a couple of other things here. So here's my server.js. My server.js outputs the MIME type. Cool. I did that. What about if I get an error? So if I do things like about, right, I get a 404. MIME type is false. And then if I go back and get that page again, so /home this time, then I do it again. I read the exact same stuff again. Right, you can see that I read 3 times for every page, right? That's how this thing works. That's how server does. Server is an event. It triggers the event every single time I have a request. The request that goes to the server, this idea of doing a request response, as soon as I go here and I request something, I go to the server, it processes the request and comes back with a response. And it does this multiple times per page. Okay, that's something to note. Okay? So that's what's happening here with this create server thing. And I want you to understand that because, here, let's make a change to my app. So let's make my font size 60. Okay, so here's my font size 60. And if I go back to my page and if I refresh my page, here, now my font size is 60. You know that this is working because I made it really massive, right? Okay, and you can see that every time I go back and do another request for the page, it comes back again and again and again. Guys, this is a key learning, okay? Because I don't just look at one page at a time with my server. I look at every component that loads something into the page. That means if I had an image, it would be a request. If I had another page that I'm loading, it would be a request. Anything that I inject into my HTML page is a new request. Now our page is stupidly simple right here, okay? It's really simple. But look, I'm doing 3 requests every single time just because I have an app CSS and an app.js inside of this. Okay, questions on this one before we move on? Okay, last part for today. Last part. We did our Node.js server, and we did it in JavaScript. Okay, we did it with JavaScript. We did it JavaScript with the old way of doing it, like I said. We used our server.js. We did a JS ending, okay? But I want to tell you that I'm going to talk about something else going forward after today, right? We're going to move away from CommonJS module pattern, and we're going to use something called ECMAScript module pattern. Okay, I'm talking about it today so you understand, but I'm not going to do it today, okay? So if I look at the ECMAScript module pattern, okay? We looked at that, and we looked at the ECMAScript module pattern. It's a module pattern that doesn't look like require anymore. Instead of require, we use import, okay? We use import statements, import and export, okay? And if I looked at ECMAScript module pattern, right, for Node.js, okay, let's just look at that. I'm just trying to show you this so you see what this looks like, right? So ECMAScript modules it looks very different than CommonJS modules. So if I looked at ECMAScript modules, right, for for this, so here's ECMAScript modules. What do they look like, right? And if I look at here, it looks kind of like this, right? So we start thinking about modules and module pattern as we move forward. I can connect other modules together with an import statement. Each module is going to have, so here's the example. This is the equivalent of, of what it would look like if I was going to import my file system. Okay, so I'm just going to look at this. So I changed the, I'm talking about this right now, but I'm going to go into more detail next week. So I would change the require, I would take away the require, and I will use an import statement here instead. And so you're going to see me change this starting next week, okay? For now, this is good enough. We don't have to do anything. And I'm going to get rid of the console log because we don't care about seeing every single MIME type. Let's get rid of it. This is your final version of the server for today, okay? Now, I want you to put it up on GitHub. I want you to put up on GitHub. And for you, we haven't really talked about this, but for you, what I want to do, and I've done it for you already, if I look up online, okay, if I look up online, and if I go to github.com/Centennial College, you can see that last week we had a COMP229, kind of thing that we did together, right? You guys are section 2. That's you guys last week, okay? And we had this COMP229 section 2, and I had this, that's what I put up there. I want to change this week, okay? So I'm going to get rid of this thing altogether, and I'm going to make a brand new folder. So if whenever time I put stuff up here from now on, instead of it being in COMP229 M2022 section 2, and it's going to look like this, I'm going to have every week in here. Okay, that's what I'm going to do instead. Okay, so how does that work? Well, if I look up at my folder structure, right, for week 2, I need to make it a repository, right? But I want to make the repository something that I can add to every week. So you don't have to look at like 10 repositories, only one every single week. And if you notice, right now on, if I go back to Centennial, I have this stuff, right? Week 1 and week 2. I'm going to make a brand new folder for myself. Okay, so to show you, here's my brand new folder. And my brand new folder is going to be called COMP229 M2022, right? And it's going to be for you guys, right? So everybody's stuff is going to be here. And I'm just going to shut this down for a second, Visual Studio Code, just for a second. And I'm going to take week 1 and week 2, and put it inside of our modules. Okay, there we go. So you can see that COMP229 M2022 as week 1 and week 2 inside of it. Yay, right? I'm also going to kill this repository. The way to kill a repository is go to settings, and you're going to go scroll down all the way to where it says danger zone, right? And it says delete the repository. Delete. So I'm going to grab all this. I'm going to copy it and put it in there. And press on, I understand. And now that repository is finito. It's gone, right? And I want to add a new repository. I'm going to add a new repository. So I'm going to make a new one. And this is going to be called COMP229 in the summer 2022 semester. And it's going to be all of your labs, right, that I'm doing. These are all labs that I'm doing, right, labs. I'm going to make it public. Okay, so you can see them all. And I'm going to create my repository. And once I've done this, this is a way of you doing your repository. You're going to have a bunch of steering directions here, okay, that I'm going to use later on. So the way we use Git locally, I'm just going to pull up Visual Studio Code again. Visual Studio Code can't find my files because I moved them around. That's okay. I want to drag and drop in this time the COMP229 M2022 folder. So the containing folder, right? There it is. And you can see now I have both week 2 and week 1, just like we would have in our folder structure, right? And in here, I want to type in my labs, right? So I want to initialize my repository. So guys, these are the commands for GitHub. So for you guys to know, and this is for your bonus, okay? I want to do a git init. Git init creates a local Git repository, okay? I'm going to press enter. That's what it does, git init. Now, the problem with week 2, let's go back to week 2 for a second. So week 1, right, as an example, let's take a look at week 1. I want to take a look at week 1 for you. Week 1 already had a Git folder. Let's get rid of it. The hidden.git folder, you can remove, and you can see it, first of all, if you go to View, and if you look at File, Name Extensions, and Hidden Items, you can see the hidden.git folder in week 2. We want to get rid of week 2 because we don't want to use that one. Okay. But inside of my COMP229 folder now, right, you can see that I have 2 folders, week 1 and week 2. Week 2 has node modules. Okay. Node modules is, well, that's not my code. That's somebody else's code that I've gone and got and kind of installed here. This week, it's okay. We can put node modules up online. But next week, I need something called a git ignore file. My git ignore file will ignore certain modules that I'm going to be using. Okay? But for today, it's okay. It's okay for me to do this. So now the first thing is I said git init. The next one is command number 1. This is command number 1, git init. So command number 2, git add dot. Dot means add everything to the staging area. Okay? All right. Enter. Command 3, git commit -m for message, and the typical commit message is initial commit or first commit. Enter. And then, so those are the 3 commands. Let me type them in for into your panel there, your chat. Git init, right? Git add dot. Git commit -m, and that's initial commit. And you can also type in first commit. Sometimes people type first commit, sometimes people use initial commit. They're the same. Okay? And then I need some steering directions to create a connection to GitHub. And up online, GitHub gave me that when I made my new repository. It gave me these steering directions right here. It says push an existing repository from command line. I'm going to grab these 3 lines of code here, copy them. Copy them. You can copy them this way. Go back to my terminal and right-click, and then it's here. If you're on a Mac, you need to paste them in. If you do this for the first time on your terminal, remember last week we installed Git for Windows. This week it'll ask you to log in to GitHub. If you have a GitHub account, right? It'll ask you to log in right here for the first time. If you log in incorrectly, you'll get a message. Okay? Now if I refresh, you can see that I have a repository with 2 weeks, week 1 and week 2. Week 1 and week 2. Okay? What I want you guys to do is the same process that I just did for yourself if you want to get the bonus. Now I've recorded this for you, so it's not impossible for you guys to do, but those are the 3 commands. Let's go over them one more time before we go for the day, all right? The 3 commands that I want you to do is to initialize the repository is git init, okay? The next one is git add dot. This adds everything in your folder, all right? And git commit -m and a friendly message for the snapshot that you're taking, which is initial commit or first commit, all right? Those are the 3 basic commands you do when you initialize a repository, okay? And then what we did was we took the 3 commands from our Git repository that it gave us. And the 3 commands, we can see what they were, are these ones. We added a remote, right? So these are the 3 commands. Git remote add origin. Let me type those in as well. So it's git, that's what we typed in from what Git gave us. Git remote add origin. So remote is the connection between our local repository and our remote repository. Add, we're adding a new name and we're naming it origin, okay? And then some kind of path, whatever the path, path to your, GitHub repo. Okay, that's what goes in there, okay? And then the next command is git branch, and then it says -m main. And this basically says, we want you to make your default branch name main. That's your default branch name. We're changing the name of the branch to main, okay? And then the third one is git push -u, which is unconditional, across your origin remote to the main branch. So again, git push -u for unconditional across your origin remote to main. That's what it is. Those are the commands we got from GitHub. Okay, we got those 3 commands from GitHub, right? And this is after we created a repository. We got those 3 commands. This path to your GitHub repo is going to be different every single time when you make a brand new repo, right? So those are the commands you need. If I want to add in another change, every single time I want to add another feature or whatever, I'm going to do the same commands. I'm going to say git add dot. We don't have to do an init anymore, right? And this is something that we're going to repeat, okay? So these are repeatable, right? Git add dot, git commit -m, and then some friendly message that describes what you have changed, okay? And then git push. That's all you have to do over and over again. Git add dot, git commit, git push. Git add dot, git commit, git push. And that repeatable stuff is going to happen over and over again when you add more and more stuff to your project, okay? So I want you to do this part this week, just this part, okay? And you're going to see me do this stuff over and over again as I continue. Sunday, path. Or Saturday, sorry. The lab, the bonus lab is due Saturday. So you have another chance to see this on Wednesday. Okay. Questions around anything we've covered today? So again, stuff we covered today was Nodemon for the first time. We use Nodemon. And Nodemon allows us to run our project. There's our project, server.js, right? And instead of Control-C and, kind of stopping the server and restarting the server, Nodemon restarts the server for us. That's what Nodemon does. Really cool tool. we talked about making a very simple server.js, that reads from the file system. And it actually detects, because of the use of this third-party module, that's what this is. This is a third-party module. Because of the third-party module MIME types, it reads from the file system and outputs the right type of file. It can read almost any file that we give it right now. Very, very basic, direct file read, right? But it only reads the files that it knows. Okay. There's definitely some issues here, but it's a very basic server we made. We made a very basic backend server. All right, any questions before we go for the day? I'm going to stop now recording, and I'm going to take some questions and fix people's problems, okay, as much as possible. Any questions before we go?
Hello.
Yes.
Hi, Professor.
Yeah.
I have a question. First of all, we went through really. So just
yeah.
The extension that you can
Yeah.
So
okay.
Another thing that
Okay. So let's stick back afterwards. I'm just asking about this stuff here. Let's stick around, and then I'll see if I can fix you. Okay. For the other people, I said Johan's asking, do we have to add git.com the week-to-week files, or just the assignments? For me, it's just the assignments. Unless you want to get the lab bonus, Johan, then that's when you add in the next one. Okay, so if you wanted to do the bonus, then you definitely have to have Git every single week that we're doing things together. But for the assignments, definitely you have to do GitHub all the time. Elias, or Git and GitHub. Elias says, for the lab, the code should be exactly like yours. I added a lot of comments to understand better. The answer is, it doesn't have to be exactly like mine. As long as, if you added more comments, awesome, that's great. But it should work exactly like mine does. Paul says, do we create a profile on GitHub? Absolutely, you should be doing that. That should be your first step, Paul, from last week, right? So we all have to have an account on GitHub, okay? So if you haven't had a chance to do that, make an account on GitHub today, all right? So any other questions related to this one? Pant says, and then we have to create our own repository on GitHub. Yes, you do. Yeah, your own repository as a test. That's how you're going to get your lab bonus, okay? So for the bonus lab, before we move on, with everyone else, and then I'll stop recording all this stuff. I know I'm going overtime, guys. I do apologize. But for the lab, if you look at the lab's bonus, this is a bonus lab that's coming up here, all right, for our lab. If you look at it, what I'm asking you to do, right, if you scroll down, it says create a GitHub account, unless you already have one. Create a new repository for this week's practice project. Push your local practice project to GitHub in the same steps that I used, right? Your project should demonstrate a working local node server, which is what we did, right? And you want two things to submit: a working link to your repository on GitHub submitted to eCentennial, as well as a couple of screenshots of your code and your Node.js server, and PNG format, please. So a couple of screenshots. That's what I want you to submit for this lab, for you to get bonus for this one. It's a bonus. It's going to add in. If you don't do it, you don't lose anything. But I think it's great if you try it out, because this is a great way of practicing with the stuff that we've talked about so far. Okay. All right. So I'm going to stop recording here. That's all that I wanted to talk about today. There's lots and lots more we can do, but we're going to talk more about Node.js and Express.js next week. Okay. So let's stop recording now. All right, I've stopped.